YouTube channel, Braintree District Council Committees. This channel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting could be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There is a delay between the meeting and the broadcast of about 30 seconds. Webcast officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm?
Thank you, Chloe. The broadcast is now started.
Thank you, Will. Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphones when not speaking and consider turning your video off to reduce the interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. Presentations, images or video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on screen. Please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to reports, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for this evening. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the access to information regimes, FOI and ERI, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified by a prefix of councillor before their name. There are officers in attendance and these are identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker for this meeting and 2 meeting facilitators. I can confirm that this meeting is quorate. The Corporate Governance Group consists of the following members: Councillor Richard Van Dalken, Councillor Paul Eusden, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Vanessa Santamoro, Councillor Dean Wallace, Councillor Tom Walsh, and Councillor Lynn Walters. The officers for the meetings are as follows: Trevor Wilson, Head of Finance, Phil Myers, Financial Services Manager, Angela Mitchell, Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, Chris Fleetham, Corporate Director, Steve Bladden, Partner of BDO, the Council's appointed auditor. Jessica Mann will be clerking the meeting, and myself and Emma Wisby are the meeting facilitators. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Van Dalken.
Apologies, Chairman. Could you please start again? Your microphone was switched off. Thank you.
My apologies, not a good start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chloe. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. This is the first virtual meeting of this committee. My name is Councillor Richard Van Dalken and I'll be chairing this meeting. As you know, the Council is new to virtual meetings, so I would ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we feel our way through this new way of working. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I can see you all, but please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this meeting, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Chairman, all your members are present for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll proceed then to item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of January. Seems a long time ago. The Minutes, they were of various items, the key financial indicators as of the 30th of November of last year, the internal audit update, including progress against the audit plan 2019-2020, certification of claims and returns annual report 2018-2019, a fraud update, and a draft Treasury Management Strategy Statement. For this item, I'll be seeking your agreement. Therefore, silence will be assent. However, if a member wishes to raise an issue in respect of the minutes, please indicate via the chat function.
Do we need to move the minutes, Chair?
Well, do any members have any objection to the approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 16th of January 2020? So I take that silence as agreement that the minutes are an accurate record. Thank you. And I see that no councillors wish to speak. Thank you, members. We proceed to item 3, public question time. Members, there are no registered speakers for this evening's public question time, so I'll proceed to item 4, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the nature and this item and the nature of your interest, and please indicate you wish to speak in the chat function. So I think it looks like no declarations. So I will proceed to item 5, key financial indicators, 31st of May 2020. Members, the report is set out on pages 5 to 13 of the agenda. And may I invite Trevor Wilson, Head of Finance, to set out the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is the position of the financial indicators up to the 31st of May, so just 2 months into the financial year. As the Chair has just said, the last report you had was back in November last year. So I have moved forward to the new year. Perhaps a bit of background, page 9, just looking at the top of the page, Appendix A, in terms of our budget spend that you set back in February. We've got general fund expenditure, salaries, so split between salaries and other expenditure. So 18.8 million nearly for salaries, other controllable expenditure, 37.6 million. So a total expenditure for the current year of 56.4 million. Then we just split out general fund income, commercial and industrial property. It was something that the members of the committee were interested in previous meetings. So we're now identifying that separately. 2.9 million is the estimate for the year. Other controllable income, 38.29. So total income is 41.19. The difference between those two is the net revenue general fund controllable expenditure, 15.226 million, and that is effectively what we're the council taxpayers and we achieve from a business rate. So that's what we're the budget was set, and that's what we're comparing expenditure to date. Obviously, say the information is at the 31st of May, but I do have some updates as we go through, so I'll draw those out to members' attention. Going back to page 5, so looking at the executive summary, as at the end of May, there was a net negative variance, somewhat unsurprising given the circumstances that we've been facing since March. The major variance that we have there is on income. So previously, in previous years, we've consistently reported income has been the particular amount that the monies that we've had in has exceeded budget, but now we're actually in the position where that's not the case, and it's turned around totally with the current circumstances. So planning fees particularly are down, and also car park charges, and the interest that we receive is significantly down. At the moment, members will be aware through reports to full council that we are being requested to do reports to the government department, and we're doing those on a monthly basis on the estimates as to the financial impact of COVID on local authorities. The next one is due next Friday, 31st of July, and we'll be working on that as of tomorrow, because that's when we're told what the information requested is. So there have been subtle changes each time, so we do have to keep updating the information. The main issue for us in terms of that is, whilst we can report the snapshot on the position as you've just had there in terms of May, obviously we could do that for the end of June for this next report, but obviously they want an indication, the government wants an indication of what our income losses will be for a year, and so we have to make some assumption as to how the recovery may well play out as lockdown is eased and we get back to some sort of normality. And obviously that's an issue for conjecture, and we can play that many different ways. But the government has been providing emergency funding for the authorities. The report at B on page 5 indicates that we'd had 2 allocations, and we'd received £1.56 million in support of additional expenditure and the income position. I can report now that we have had a 3rd allocation that of 218,000. So the total support to Braintree Council from the government for in emergency funding is 1.785 million. The government has also announced that whilst that's a support in respect of additional expenditure, an announcement had been made that they are going to support the losses on income. So where they're not actually going to be recovered, they're totally irrecoverable, then the government has indicated that they will pay 75 pence in the pound for that for those particular areas, but that only relates to fees and charges. But the actual detail and how that is to be worked out is still awaited. Where we are at the current time is that the accountants are doing the first quarter's update. So it's the first real milestone for the authority, and looking at the expenditure and income of the council up until 30th of June. And that information is currently being worked on and will be presented to within the performance report that will go to Cabinet in September. And that will help, obviously, the thoughts as to how the budget process should play out for the 21-22 year. Moving through the rest of the information, there's an update about the salaries. The total budget, as I've already said, was 18.77 million. At the moment, as I've mentioned to members before, that we set the budget for salaries on the basis that all posts are occupied for the full year. Realistically, there are going to be changes during the year, so we do introduce an efficiency factor. Whilst not identified at the beginning of the year, then we do look to save that during the course of the year from vacancies, and that this year has been set at 300,000. So taken 2 months of the efficiency factor into account, then we currently have a positive variance of 70,000 with some vacancies that we're currently holding on to. So the one issue I would draw to members' attention is that the pay award, the budget provides for a 2% pay award. The employers' organisation had not long ago made an offer, a final offer of 2.75%, and that's being put to the vote by the unions at this very time, and that's so obviously that will cause additional costs to the authority on the basis that we're already 0.75% over the figure that's set in the budget. So that is something that obviously we need to be mindful of as we go through the year. A brief bit of information about the rental income. That's holding up particularly well. You'll see there that we have had discussions with a number of our tenants up at the Braintree Enterprise Centre, and some 31 who were experiencing financial hardship due to the pandemic requested a number of months deferral, and we're into that, and we're now at the position where they should be making the payments in this particular month, and so the tenancies are holding up really well, so it's a positive position. In terms of capital projects, substantial capital programme for the authority this financial year, an expectation of just under 40 million being expended. Obviously the two major projects are the Manor Street development to just under 18 million and Horizon 120 at 12.5 million. Expenditure to the end of May, the main projects have been the Suffolk Waste Partnership investment, 1.228 million. So we will be getting a revenue stream from that, revenue benefit from that. So that was a positive investment that the council agreed a few months back, and was effective from April. Manor Street development, 500,000 has been spent, and Horizon 120 just under 400,000. So works are continuing on those. Moving quickly to council tax, the amount collectible, the debit, just under 98 million for this year. The figures for May are presented there, but in terms of June, as at the end of June, we've collected 29.91%, compares to 30.46% for the previous year. So an improvement on the figures that you have reported there for May, but obviously still a bit down, which is unsurprising at this stage, given the position that a lot of our residents are in. Business rates, the collectible debit is substantially reduced, 27.26 million. It's been reduced. There's a note there that 18.5 million is benefiting the retail, leisure in businesses in the Braintree district, because they are getting retail relief for the whole of this financial year, and so we shall get that money from central government. And similarly, nurseries, child nurseries, not garden nurseries, they're getting rate relief for the year as well, and that's worth 185,000, I believe that is. So the collection rates for business rates, 26.94% as at the end of June, compares to 31.13% as at the end of June the previous year. In terms of other things to draw out, there's a report later on your agenda looking at the Treasury for the last financial year, the last item on the agenda. In terms of where we were in June and at May, obviously the levels of income and the interest rates are dropping dramatically. In terms of money that we have for investments, those are holding up, but obviously with the interest rates reducing, we are seeing pressure against the actual budget in terms of interest achieved. And that's particularly so as far as our pooled funds are concerned, where we rely on dividends. And the government had already announced that it's not expecting businesses to give out significant dividends during this current time, and that so we are anticipating a loss on interest on our pooled funds, perhaps for the current year of at least 25%, maybe higher than that, but we do hold a Treasury management reserve, so from the good times we have put money aside, and we will be looking to meet the deficit in 2021 from that. In terms of the valuations on the pooled funds, the note there at the end of May suggests that the valuation, the paper valuation, would be that we're $1 million down on the principal invested. That, as at the end of June, has reduced slightly to 940,000, I can inform members. The last note at O on page 7, we've had substantial monies that the government has asked us to give out to businesses in the way of business grants. In April, we received 31.57 million. We've been paying that out obviously during these months and that, and a substantial amount of that has been paid out. But whilst we were holding that money, that was held with the DMO just for security purposes. So we didn't look to invest that. That's purely with the Debt Management Office, which is effectively the Treasury. That's being run in there. Obviously, we didn't invest there for interest because the interest rate is 0.02%. So we're hardly making any money on that. But as I say, the main thing for that was security while we're making those payments out. So I think those are the main points I wish to draw out, Chair. Members are asked to accept the report. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. If any members wish to speak on this item, I remind you to please indicate on the chat function. And I see that Councillor Walsh wishes to make a comment. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Trevor Wilson, a useful and informative report with quite a bit of detail. I wonder if it's possible to summarise either to the year end or to maybe the end of the second quarter, what do we think our net position will be in terms of the balance between expenditure and revenue, and what did we think it would be before the COVID pandemic kicked in? So the balance of expenditure and revenue, either for 2 quarters or the whole year.
Thank you. The position for the year was an expectation that there'd be a small addition to balances. So when the estimates were set in February, we thought there'd be an addition of £200,000 to balances. The last return to government, as I say, was middle of June, and the estimate was that at that time we thought we were going to get 1.5 million, or that's as much as we were told we were going to get at that time, 1.5 million. The difference between expenditure and income indicated that taking that grant into account, and that would be something like 2 million short. But obviously the government has made further monies available, and they are going to make other monies in respect of the income that we have lost, and that's so that was a snapshot at that time. Further monies are being made available. And also, as I said in my presentation, the issue is about how the recovery will play out. So I believe when we did that, we were estimating that the second quarter we would have a 50% recovery, rising to quarter 3, 70%, and then 80% by the year out for the final quarter in terms of getting back to business as usual against our budget. But obviously those figures are just pure speculation at this time, but obviously the government wants some indication, and they left it up to each local authority to put forward what it thought. So 2 million was the last position, but to say things are moving on there, and the quarter 1 update will give us an important look again at that position and that. So
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Walsh? Yes.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Trevor, and I think Councillor Eusden wishes to ask a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On page 5, item B, we are talking about losses that are estimated to be unrecoverable. A reduction in income of 3.077 million, of which 80% is expected to be unrecoverable or irrecoverable. How much of the business rates and council tax that we're not getting is actually our share, or are we having to take the loss for the other preset people, like the police and fire and people like that?
Yes, so the figures quoted are gross in terms of the income that we won't, or we anticipate we won't collect in year, but obviously we'll pursue that in future years. The percentage to us is roughly about 10%. So the county have about 72, 73%, and then the police are now a larger proportion than ourselves at about 11%. And then you've got the fire service and also the parish councils. So those, as I say, those are gross. Ours would be less than that. If we don't collect money in year, and there's a loss on the collection fund, which is where that's all accounted for, then that must be recovered in subsequent years. And obviously that will be apportioned between the various preceptors, which, as I say, we're about 10%.
So they take their share of the loss. We don't have to bear it all.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Trevor. I just had, in fact, I was going to ask about the same thing. In other words, if we take in less council tax than anticipated, would we still be expected to pass on what county and the other preceptors would expect? And I think you're saying no at this stage anyway.
The county council has precepted an amount, and we're obliged to make that payment over to the county council. So
we are.
Yes,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
But the accounting for that is done in what was called the collection fund. So it sits outside of Braintree District Council's own accounts and that. So if there's a loss on that, then that has to be recovered in the following years from the individual preceptors and that. So previous years we've been in surplus, so monies have been given back to the authorities and that. So this may be the first year in my memory that we would be in a loss situation, but we won't know until later on in the year and that. So
so it's not quite as dire as it might sound at this stage anyway.
No.
Right. I just, it sounds very petty, but on page 9 at the top, page 9, the in the figures, column 3, I think there's a typo. It should be the 31st of May 2019. I would think, as the one next to it is the 30. Sorry, they both say 31st of May 2020. So,
Chair, yes, that is where we the spend is not even throughout the course of the year. So the third column there is the profile of what we expect to spend at the end of May. So we're comparing as at that stage what we thought we were going to spend at the end of May and what the actual position is. So
all right,
that's what they are.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, thank you, members. So if there are no further questions, I'd just like to say, obviously, these are very challenging issues, and we can be grateful that the council has been prudent in previous years, unlike some of the stories we hear of other parts of the country. So thanks to you and your team for keeping on top of this, Trevor. Members, it's asked that we accept the report. I'll take silence as agreement. Do I take it that the report has been accepted? Thank you, members. The report is accepted. We'll now proceed to agenda item 6, internal audit update, including progress against audit plans 2019-20 and 2020-21. Members, this is set out on pages 14 to 30 of the agenda. Can I invite Angela Mitchell, Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out the report?
Good evening, members, and thank you, Chairman. So this report gives a summary of the progress against the internal audit plan for 1920, progress against the current year's plan, which is on a later agenda item, a summary of the applications made in respect of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, and the results of the external quality assessment, review of implementation of recommendations, and the self-assessment against the local government application note reflecting the public sector internal audit standards. So for the 1920 plan, most items from the plan were completed, and a number of other items are included in the 2021 plan. The progress is summarised in Appendix 1 to this report. For the 2021 plan, the items in this Appendix 2 are reflecting the audits proposed in the audit plan at agenda item 8. Staff time thus far has been spent on completing the audits from the 1920 plan that were in progress, and preparation of work for the 2021 planned items. So that's Appendix 2. Appendix 3 provides a summary of the outcome of the audits that have been completed since the last report to this committee, which was January. Paragraph 4 of the report confirms that there have been no RIPA or IPA applications in 2019-20 or to the date of producing this report. Paragraph 5 details the progress against the action plan arising from the external quality assessment, which was reported to this committee in December 2017. And the bullet points under there summarise the progress in respect of the 22 recommendations, the 10 suggestions, and the 4 observations. A detailed assessment has been completed against the local government application note, which reflects the public sector internal audit standards, and section 6 there identifies the scope of that assessment, and paragraph 5.2 the an action plan arising from that assessment, further items that we will be looking at during 2021. They include reference to demonstration of core principles, the emphasis here being on demonstration. So we believe that we're obviously complying with the core principles, but that demonstrating that would be assisted with a declaration of acknowledgement by staff. The second section there refers to organisational independence and the requirement that the independence of the Chief Audit Executive, which is me for Braintree District Council, the independence must be safeguarded. The standards suggest that in some organisations it's achieved through board approval of remuneration or performance, but recognises that that's not always the way local authorities work, and therefore suggests that it can be achieved through feedback. So we will be looking at options for that. The next section relates to computer-assisted audit techniques, and these can include basic office software such as spreadsheets and Word, but there are more advanced software packages available which would provide greater opportunity for analysis, but we'll be reviewing cost and opportunity of these. Policies and procedures to guide the audit activity. So we have a number of policies, procedures, documents, forms and so on in place. Just need to complete the audit manual and pull everything together. And conducting a fraud risk assessment against the CITFA Code of Practice on managing the risk of corruption and fraud. So Chairman, that's a summary of where we are in respect of planned work, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Angie. I don't see any questions. Do any members wish to speak on this matter? If not, can I just ask a couple of things? What I may have asked this before, and if I have, I apologize. Can you remind me what insurance means in your title, or why it should be included in your rather than anybody else's portfolio?
Apologies, Angie, your microphone switched off. Would you like to switch it on, please?
Thank you. So my role does include insurance. So I am responsible for ensuring insurance cover for the authority, claims handling, and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, on page 17, audit manual, it strikes me that if every other district council in the country presumably has an audit manual, is it really necessary for us to begin from scratch and spend all that time? I'm not being provocative, it's just a question.
No, we don't tend to start from scratch on these things. There are a wide variety of sources of information to inform what we put in the plan and processes that we follow. So yes, it's simply a case of drawing it into a formal document.
Okay, thank you very much. And one final thing, the senior auditor is not seeking to obtain the CIA qualification. Is there any particular reason for that that we should be aware of, as you have a small team?
No, he simply doesn't wish to study for the certified internal auditor qualification, but the trainee auditor is currently studying and has passed the first exam.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Houston wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 2, the following audits have been completed. There are 11, I think, completed. And of the 11, one is full assurance, which I think translated into normal language means it's all okay. 7 meet are significant insurance, which means they meet a minimum standard. 3 are below the minimum standard. So that means that we're failing on those, I guess, as a council, if I read that correctly. If we're not achieving minimum standard, that must mean that we're doing something wrong or incorrect. Is that comparable with previous year, or is that an acceptable place to be? And how does that compare with, say, neighbouring authorities? Would we know that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Houston. So yes, we've got 3 significant assurance reports there. The worst classification would be no assurance, so we're relieved to not be in that position. Limited assurance, is it reflects that there are a significant number of issues that could impact on achievement of the objectives for the area reviewed, and certainly the officers are taking the matters seriously. They are looking at how to resolve the issues that have been raised in those reports. So it's a positive response to it, but it's right that we raise them. So these issues have been referred in both my annual report, and that is linked then to the annual governance statement. So as an authority, we're recognising that there have been weaknesses identified, but as I say, officers are working to put in place solutions to resolve the matters raised.
Thank you, Angie. And Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair, and indeed to Angela Mitchell for your very thorough and calm presentation. This is purely an information question, so no need to assume anything from it, but I have worked in central and local government in different positions. Do we at Braintree District Council, do we have any, I think fraud is one of your areas of responsibility, do we have any evidence of significant fraud in recent years or not?
Okay, so we do take periodically bring a report on fraud to the committee, and there was a report in January. We do have quite a strong focus on benefit related fraud, and so there is a lot of activity there. In recent months, our ability to complete investigations with interviews under caution has been limited, but there are a number of cases ready for interview, and we intend to progress those in September. As regards other types of fraud, we're aware of a number of areas of fraud risk, and in light of the business grants that have been awarded, there is a government recommendation to conduct a fraud risk assessment in that area. So that's something that we'll be working with the revenues team to assist with. So we're aware of the potential areas of fraud risk, but as I say, those are probably the most significant areas where issues have been identified so far.
Thank you very much, Angie. Just a final something from myself. Looking through the, is it 7 or 8 areas on pages 25 to 29, the 3 limited assurance areas that Councillor Eusden pointed out. I think we really need to be keeping on top of, and I'm sure you are, but we as a group here need to be keeping on top of the limited assurance for contract management and Manor Street project, which together add up to an awful lot of money. I know money isn't the most important thing in the world, perhaps, but in terms of what we're trying to do here, it certainly is very key. And I look forward to seeing in the later documents, or perhaps you can talk about how we're going to keep on, as I said, keep on top of any issues that may have come out in view of the large contracts, and indeed our reputation in getting the contracts finished. I'm not asking you to comment on it at the moment, Angie. I think that's all. So thank you, members. And this report is for noting only. I'll take silence as agreement. And do I take it that the report is noted? Silence, therefore, thank you. The report is noted, and we will proceed to agenda item 7, Internal Audit Annual Report 2019-20, set out on pages 31 to 43 of the agenda. Can I invite Angie Mitchell once more to set out the report?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm required to provide a conclusion on the control framework each year. And this outlines the factors, this report outlines the factors pertinent to forming that opinion, including the areas from which we have drawn assurance. The conclusion from the 2019-20 work is that the systems of internal control and the internal control environment is generally adequate, with some improvements identified, which management are in the process of resolving. So the annual report itself provides the detail, the background, the role of audit, the detail of the overall opinion, a summary of the recommendations from each of the audits conducted during the year, a summary of internal audit performance, and the quality assurance and improvement programme. So again, request that members accept the internal audit annual report for 2019-20, and Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Angie. I don't see any questions at the moment. If I may just ask, in the circumstances that you're having to work now with COVID, is there appropriate? Well, I'm sure there's cooperation. Are you able to get the information you want at the time you want, in the form you want?
Thank you, Chair. So in normal circumstances, I'm in favour of face-to-face auditing more than desktop auditing.
Sure.
But that said, the staff are able to communicate very effectively. The council has set up various means of communication and enhanced these as a result of the response to the pandemic. So we are fully able to keep in contact with all of our colleagues and able to conduct the work physically. We do respect that many services have a significant workload, particularly as a result of the current situation. But we obviously aim to work with them and around them in terms of the timing of the work that we produce.
Thank you very much, Angie. We have a question from Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair and Angela. Just very briefly, in the executive summary on page 31, you refer at the end of the third paragraph to reasonable assurance. Where does reasonable come in relation to the 4 areas from full to no assurance on page 43? And as an example of that, I think there are 18 reviews that are full or significant or substantial, but 3 are limited, and 1 involves senior management review. Can you say anything about the senior management review, and what does reasonable assurance mean in relation to the 4 categories? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. So the last one of the points there related to page 43 and the definitions. So those definitions are the assurance levels that are applied to audits. So if you see on page 39 the list of audits that have been undertaken and those that were assigned full assurance, substantial assurance and limited assurance classification. So that's relating to the audit specifically rather than the annual opinion. So the reasonable assurance translates into a little more detail in the overall opinion, which is on page 36 of the report. So in this instance, I felt it was generally adequate, but with some improvement required. And yes, the report does indeed highlight at paragraph 6.4 on page 38 the reviews which resulted in a limited assurance outcome. You commented on the one relating to management working to resolve. So at this point in time, we haven't got a complete list of agreed outcomes and actions arising from that report. It's hot off the press, but the expectation is that they will be agreed very shortly, and some more information brought back to this committee at the next meeting in October. Does that cover your points?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Angie, and members. It's asked that we accept this report. Again, I'll take silence as agreement. Do I take it that the report has been accepted? Thank you, members. The report is accepted. We will now proceed to agenda item 8, the draft internal audit plan 2020-2021. This is set out on pages 44 to 56 of the agenda. And please can I invite Angie Mitchell, once more, Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out the report. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this report is to present the draft internal audit plan for 2021 to the Corporate Governance Group for consideration and approval. Paragraph 1 of the introductory report states that the public sector internal audit standards require that the plan is sufficient to give the Chief Audit Executive, so that's myself for Braintree Council, sufficient evidence to provide an annual audit opinion. And so the plan reflects on the key elements of that opinion. So it considers the corporate priorities and risks and areas of internal control, risk management and governance. It's quite a challenging plan. The work will focus on priority areas 1 and 2 audits first, and updates will be brought to this committee to each meeting. COVID-19 has inevitably influenced the plan, and we are considering areas where the way we as an authority work has changed and the impact that that has had on the controls, and where new responsibilities have arisen, such as in the payment of business grants. So those aspects have been considered when drafting this plan. So the plan itself is detailed in Appendix 1, and Chair, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Angie. I see no questions, but if I could just ask regarding number 10, business grants, that's obviously a lot of money. Was it about £30 million, I think, that we've been handling? Did your, you've actually been looking at this, have you, up to now? I know it's in the plan, but it is something we've been looking at in the last month or two?
Yes. So there has been some contribution to the revenues team in terms of assisting with their activity and working together to determine the actions to assess the applications to ensure that they are all appropriate and valid. A couple of particular cases we have been working with the team on as well, and as I mentioned in an earlier report, the expectation is that as an authority we need to conduct a fraud risk assessment of the business grants process adopted and the checks that have been made on the business grants to ensure that they're all valid. So yes, we have conducted some work. Bulk of the work obviously conducted by the revenues team. Yes, absolutely. But there's been some activity there.
I hear or I understand that there wasn't as much fraud as we might have anticipated, which is good, and we'll look forward to hearing the final report on on this, and obviously as you mentioned, the COVID crisis has will influence things like risk management as you go forward. On page 55, what is NDRCT? Is something to do with fuel? Is it? No. NDRCT, identify fraud risk areas and review against monitoring.
So that's non-domestic rates and council tax.
Oh, right. Okay. So I can't see any questions. Is that correct, Emma?
That is correct, Chairman. You may proceed
Right.
with concluding this item.
So thank you very much, Angie, and members. It's asked that we endorse the report and your plan for 2021. I will take silence as agreement. Do I take it that the report has been endorsed? Thank you, members. The report is endorsed, and we will now proceed to agenda item 9, External Audit Plan 2019-2020. Members, this report is set out on pages 57 to 89 of the agenda. And may I, first of all, welcome Steve Bladen from BDO, first time I've seen you here, and look forward to working with you. And can I invite you to set out the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I thought before I start, as Councillor Van Dorken has said, I'm conscious this is my first meeting of the Corporate Governance Group. So I thought it would be just helpful if I perhaps introduced myself. So I joined BDO as a director in its public sector assurance team back in January 2020. And I've picked up a number of audits across BDO's portfolio of local government, NHS and central government clients, Braintree District Council being one of those. Prior to joining BDO, I was a senior manager at EY, and I think EY were your auditors prior to BDO taking the audit on a couple of years ago. And then before that, I was with the Audit Commission as well, so quite a long background in public sector audit. And look forward to working with you over the coming years. So just on to our report for this evening, which is our 2019-20 annual audit plan. So this report sets out the approach that we will be taking to our audit of the Council's 2019-20 financial statements. So the report's quite a long report, but what I'll do is I'll try and pull out the key points for you. So I think firstly on page 65, we've set out the level of materiality we'll be adopting for our audit. Now we've set that at 1.4 million, and that's based on 2% of the Council's gross expenditure. And that's broadly consistent with what we've used in previous years. And I think just in terms of materiality, what we do is we use that to assess both the risks that we have identified that we will address in terms of our audit, but we also use that figure to compare the overall level of error that we identified during the course of our audit, and just helps us determine whether or not the financial statements that we're auditing give a true and fair view. We have now received the Council's draft financial statements, and we're in the process of auditing those. So we do update our overall level of materiality based on those financial statements, but it's broadly consistent with the amount that we calculated at the planning stage of our audit. I think the next area I'll just pull out for you is the significant risks that we've identified, both to our audit of the financial statements and our value for money conclusion. So we've set those out on pages 69 to 74. So the first of those two risks are the risk of management override and the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. Now, both those risks are mandated by auditing standards, and so they would appear in virtually any audit plan that BDO produces, and they have been pulled out in previous audit plans that we've prepared for this council. What we have done within the plan is set out where, for the council, we think those risks are most likely to manifest themselves, and that really drives where we will be directing our testing. So for the risk of management override, it's around the use of significant estimates and judgments, journal entries, and in particular additions to non-current assets and investment properties, where there's scope or where there's judgment used in determining whether something is a non-current asset, an investment property, or whether or not it should be just disclosed as repairs and maintenance expenditure. For the risk of revenue recognition, we think that risk is primarily around the recognition of grant income, and where judgments are required in relation to the recognition of that. And members have already heard on a number of occasions today, this evening, about the amount of grant income that the council has received. So we will just be looking at that as part of our audit and how that's disclosed in the financial statements. The next two risks are around the valuation of property, plant and equipment and investment property, and then again the valuation of the council's pension fund liability. So again, I think those risks are broadly consistent with what we've identified in previous years. The valuation of both of those areas is complex, and the judgments taken in relation to both those assets and liabilities will have a significant impact on their measurement. And we therefore, because of that, we therefore consider those to be a significant risk in terms of the valuation of those items. And we've set out in our plan the sort of work that we'll be doing to cover those risks off. Finally, we have raised two significant risks in relation to our value for money conclusion. So the first of those relates to financial sustainability. And what we will be doing there is looking at how the council's managing its finances, and in particular the need to deliver savings in future years. So we're aware that in the council's medium-term financial strategy, there's a savings target identified. We think that's fairly significant, and we'll be looking to see how the council is addressing that. As members have already discussed this evening, or has been brought to their attention, there are a number of significant capital projects that the council's undertaking across the district, and we'll just be looking at the governance arrangements that the council's established to manage those projects. So in particular, I'm referring to the Manor Street development and the Horizon 120 projects. The remainder of the plan really just includes a number of appendices in which we set out further information on our responsibilities, explaining a bit more detail the concept of materiality, and explain how we'll communicate with you. I think also importantly, it reaffirms our independence and our ability to undertake an independent audit. As I said, we have just started our audit of the council's financial statements. So what we will be doing in the October meeting is reporting back to you on the outcome of that, that audit, and we'll report what we found against each of those significant risks that I've just identified. But at this stage, happy to take any questions on the content of the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bladen. Any questions, members? I just wanted to ask, excuse me, and perhaps you can remind me I know the date of audits needed to be completed has been put back because of COVID. It's in October now, is it?
It's actually the end of November.
End of November.
Yes.
And you don't foresee any issues in meeting that that target?
No, I think our expectation is that we'll be finished the audit a lot earlier than that date. What we have to do before we can issue our audit opinion, though, is report our findings to those charged with governance. So my intention is that we will issue our audit opinion immediately after the October meeting of this committee.
Right, thank you very much. Again, no questions. It's asked, members, it's asked that we note the external audit plan 2019-20 together with the proposed audit fees. I will take silence as agreement. Do I take it that the report has been noted? Thank you, members. The report is noted, and we can now proceed to agenda item 10, strategic risk management.
Chairman, before you take agenda item 10, could I ask you to thank Mr. Bladen for his attendance this evening. Unless he's required for any further items on the agenda, invite him to retire for the evening. Thank you.
That sounds like a very good idea, and my apologies, Mr. Bladen. I try and be more polite in future. As Emma has suggested, if you do wish to retire, please feel free.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I might just, as it is my first meeting and I'm still getting to know the council, I think it would be helpful if I just stayed on for the rest of the meeting. But thank you for the opportunity to.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So thank you, members. The report is noted, and we will now proceed to agenda item 10, strategic risk management. This is set out on pages 90 to 116 of the agenda. And can I invite Trevor Wilson, Head of Finance, to set out the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report is somewhat a past report, and it's one that was held over from our meeting being postponed from March. So this looks at the strategic risk register that was considered by Cabinet on the 10th of February, which was the last time that it was reviewed. And that, as members may recall, was part of a member development evening back in November 2019, and a number of you, if not all, participated in that. So this records the position as far as the strategic risk register at that time. That members agreed to increase the number of risks from the previous register by one, that climate change risk was identified and put onto the risk register. So we have 11 strategic risks that we are monitoring. I think a number of times this evening has been mentioned about current events, that they have impacted on the risks around the authority and their community, businesses, etc. And obviously the next update, which was due to be or will be reported to Cabinet in September, will obviously reflect on that, and I would suggest all of the risks that are presented in this report, at least the wording will be revised, and so senior management are currently be considering these risks, and they will be brought before Cabinet in September. The risks are, well, as members went through, so they will be recognisable from that development evening. I don't think I need to present anything further on that. Happy to take any questions, but accepting that there is going to be a major review of that in the coming weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Trevor. I don't see any questions, and on the basis of what you're saying, Trevor, that it will be reviewed or is being reviewed at the moment, and will be put to members quite shortly. I don't have any further comments at this time. On that basis, it's asked members that we note and endorse the strategic risk register and the action plans for managing the high-rated risks.
Sorry, Chairman, sorry to interrupt you. Councillor Walsh would actually like to ask a question. I do apologise.
Oh, yes, Councillor Walsh, of course.
Sorry if I mentioned it rather lately. I'm pleased to see, Trevor, that climate change, climate emergency is included. Mine is a fairly specific and a general question. You'll see what I mean. I think on page 91, it refers to 9 areas requiring management action. And then a bit further down, it says management action plans are being produced for 8 risks. Is there one of the risk areas without a management plan? And secondly, how often are these risks reviewed? And thirdly, an easy question to ask, but perhaps I should ask it. are we planning to include, given the current situation and what's been going on for a few months, a risk covering areas such as the pandemic?
Yes, Councillor, I would fully expect a risk to be developed in terms of the pandemic and how we will be progressing out of that. And there'll be specific references to or the effects of those on each of the risks and that, and not least the financial ones that are mentioned. Those will obviously have major updates as to the impact they have on the authority going forward. In terms of the risks, we aim to review the strategic risk register twice a year. So effectively once by members' involvement and then once by senior officers, and obviously taken and with the endorsement of the portfolio holders and then agreed by Cabinet. In respect to the first part of the question, if you could repeat that one, please.
Certainly, yes. I'm referring to page 91.
Yes.
I think in the third paragraph, it says the number of the risks above the risk tolerance requiring active management is 9. And then below the chart, a few paragraphs down, it says there are management action plans for each of the 8 risks above. Should I conclude from that there is another risk that doesn't need a management action plan, or are they not comparable?
You can conclude from that that's a typing error by myself. Apologies for that, members. That those should have the same figures, and that so they should be. There'll be 9 that have management action plans. So apologies for that, members.
Thank you for that, Trevor. I don't see any other questions, so thank you. It's asked that we note and endorse the strategic risk register and the action plans for managing the high-rated risks. I will take silence as agreement. Do I take it the report has been noted and endorsed? Thank you, members. The report is noted and endorsed, and we will now proceed to agenda item 11, updated regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and Investigatory Powers Act 2016 policy, set out on pages 117 to 131 of the agenda. And can I invite Angela Mitchell, Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out the report?
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the revised draft Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and Investigatory Powers Act 2016 revised policy for approval, and informs members of the outcome of the recent RIPA and IPA inspection conducted by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. So RIPA governs the use of covert techniques by public authorities and requires that we seek only necessary information, and to do this in a manner which is proportionate and compatible with human rights. An application to conduct covert surveillance is subject to both internal approval routes and also to judicial approval. The IPA makes further provisions relating to the acquisition of communications data. Braintree Council has not made any RIPA or IPA applications since 2012. The Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office inspection is conducted on each local authority approximately every 3 years, and the Council's last inspection was conducted this May. The inspector concluded that the Council demonstrated a level of compliance such that no physical inspection was required at this time. He reviewed the draft RIPA and IPA policy, and his comments have been incorporated in the draft that's presented to you tonight. He concluded that investigating officers from teams most likely to use RIPA have received training and noted that further training is planned. The council had intended one course on open source intelligence to be provided to relevant staff in April, but this was deferred for obvious reasons. The inspector was satisfied that staff did not use covert profiles to befriend individuals or for systematic monitoring of social networking sites. The inspector noted that there hasn't been any formal report of the council's use or absence of use of RIPA powers to elected members since 2018. And this report remedies that omission. Future updates will be presented to the committee in the audit progress reports. The inspector also provided insight into future areas of inspection regarding the safeguarding of data associated with RIPA and IPA applications. So Chairman, I invite members to note the outcome of the IPCO inspection and to approve the revised RIPA and IPA policy as detailed in Appendix 1.
Thank you very much, Angie. Are there any questions from members regarding this? Who does, if Braintree District Council wish to make applications for RIPA or IPA, do they do it to that organisation, as far as you know?
No, the IPCO is an oversight function, if you like, an oversight body. If we decide we need to make a RIPA or IPA application, we have an internal process for ensuring that the application is appropriate and subject to authorisation, and then it's subject to judicial approval as well. So the process is separate to IPCO. IPCO have oversight and provide support and guidance in respect of our processes.
And if the operations team wish to put a camera in an area with the permission of the landowner, or it might be on our land, that to identify people fly tipping, as far as you know, is that something that needs to be applied for?
So there are a number of conditions, and the team that deals with fly tipping are trained in RIPA and understands the boundaries of what they can and can't do, and the point at which RIPA authorisation would be required.
But they don't have to apply as such.
So there are distinctions around whether the camera is covert and whether the activity that's being conducted is surveillance and directed surveillance and so on. So
okay, perhaps not for here. But thank you very much. Still no questions from other members. So thank you very much, Angie. Let's see if I've lost myself now. Thank you, members. It's asked that we note the outcome of the recent Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, IPCO, inspection, and approve the revised Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 policy as detailed in the appendix to the main report. I will take silence as agreement. Can I take it that the report has been noted and approved? Thank you, members. The report is noted and approved, and we will now proceed to agenda item 12, the Annual Governance Statement 2019-20. Members, the report is set out on pages 132 to 157 of the agenda, And can I please invite Trevor Wilson, Head of Finance, to set out the report?
Thank you, Chair. Each year, the Council is required to produce an annual governance statement to give detail of the governance and control framework in place that were in place in the preceding year. And the important thing also to make mention is up to the date of publication, and I'll come back to that point in a little while. But so the annual governance statement is looked at in terms of the Council's governance arrangements, its risk management, its internal control arrangements, and we undertake a review of those to support the annual governance statement, which is published as part of the statement of accounts each year. Part of the process is to review the local code of corporate governance, which the authorities have. That's been established as part of best practice and follows the CIPFA SOLAS. SOLAS is the Chief Executive's organisation. CIPFA is the accountant's organisation for public sector. The best practice framework has been applied, and in terms of the local code, that is put forward for you, pages 136 to 146. Essentially, this lays out the governance arrangements that we have in place in the Braintree District Council. There's items introduction on page 136 in terms of what good governance looks like, in terms of the principles that the good practice has identified. And I've been through, and with colleagues, we've updated Appendix A. The principal thing for difference between last year and as we move forward into next year is the scrutiny functions and the changes there that have taken place from the overview and scrutiny to performance management board and yourselves and the other two development groups, and that so those are reflected in there. So the core principles are very much as they were previously. Hopefully, if you've had a chance to go through those, you'll recognise the responses that are made to each of the areas in terms of how we show that we've met each of the core principles. So the review of that forms part of the process of coming up with an annual governance statement, and indeed from pages 147, the draft annual governance statement. That lays out initially the 7 principles, and we just give a brief update so that when this is published, obviously the reader will get opportunity to read part of what has been, or what is included in our local code of governance. I think the main points I'd like to draw out to members on this is if we turn to page 151, then this is where we start to look at the review of the effectiveness of the governance framework. So having set out the various principles, how do we measure up against those, and what are we going to put in the annual governance statement in terms of how we've performed? So we look at it from 2 aspects. One is in year, what has happened during the course of the year to make sure our governance arrangements are robust, and then some review processes that are undertaken at the end of the year. So under, as I say, from section 3, 151 over to 152 and 153, then we've got the items that happen during the course of the year. That Cabinet plays a role, yourselves play a role in terms of the reports you receive during the course of the year, the Performance Management Board, the work that it has undertaken, the report that the Section 151, Chris Fleeton, produces for the budget, and then we look at the complaints procedures in terms of members' code of conduct. That's referenced at the second bullet point on the top of page 152. Just giving members and the reader an indication of the any issues that are arisen during the course of the year. There's reference to stuff that things that Angie Mitchell has drawn attention to as we've gone through tonight's agenda in terms of the role of internal audit, the internal audit charter. We've then got the reports that you have received from the external auditors during the course of the year, and also primarily the annual audit letter for the previous financial year 18-19 that was reported in July 2019. We look at external assessments, so not just the external auditor, but any other investigations or reviews that have been taken place during the course of the year. So the Local Government Association, a cyber security stocktake was undertaken in 2018. An action plan was produced from that, and that has been delivered in the course of this year. And in terms of representation on management board, then with the corporate director is appointed as the security representative at management board, so that it is considered at the highest level. Other external inspections to draw attention to. Last year we reported about operator's license. A review of that was undertaken, compliance with that. There was an action plan for the authority to deliver as a result of that review, and that was to be concluded by an independent verification of our plan, and that was undertaken by the Freight Transport Association in September 2019, and that confirmed that the vast majority had been achieved. There were 3 areas requiring improvement, and those have subsequently been addressed. There's reference to the local government ombudsman or social care ombudsman, and in terms of the activities that or the issues that have been raised with those and with that organisation, and the outcomes from those. We then look at the review of the governance arrangements undertaken at the year end. We've got signed assurances from the senior managers in terms of the key elements of the control framework and how they've met those as we've been through the year. A substantial item was considered by yourselves at item 7, so the audit, insurance and managers or broad managers annual report for 1920. That is used as evidence of how we have progressed, and the assurance has been given there. So then we move on to the assurance statement, and ultimately this is this document is going to be signed, if you're happy with it, by the Chief Executive and the leader of the council. So there is an assurance statement. So that when we've looked at 1920, essentially the vast majority of the year was business as we've been used to. Obviously then in March things changed significantly, so right at the tail end of the year there were these changes, and we've already referred to the fact tonight that the statement of accounts is required to be produced by the 30th of November, and the deadline for the draft set of accounts was the 31st of August. So those dates have been moved back by a regulation that was issued, looking particularly at the impact of coronavirus. As we've heard, we have produced a draft statement of accounts, and they are currently with audit, and that we're looking to bring it back to yourselves in October. So we're looking to conclude the situation by 31st of October. And that in itself, so whilst we are seeking or asking the committee's approval of this tonight, as Mr. Bladen's already explained, and that the position will be reported back to yourselves, and the issue with the annual governance statement is it's not just for 1920, it is for the position as at the time of publication. So if there are any further events that need to be reflected in this statement, then they will be brought back to yourselves at the October meeting ahead of. That will be taken as one of the first items before that is then considered with the statement of accounts and the auditor's comments. So it is a live document, and we are required to keep that up to date. We've mentioned a couple of times tonight about issues that have come up, and that they are reflected in here. So governance issues, there are some things to draw out and to put before before the reader in terms of what we've identified. So there's on top of page 155, we're doing more by electronic means, and the IT network security and cyber security is obviously paramount importance, and so there's recognition that we need to pay particular attention to that. Also reflecting on, as we've mentioned a few times, about the size of our investment programme going forward over the next year or two. Then we need to make sure that there's rigour in ensuring continuous and strong and effective governance in those areas. And as I say, they've been mentioned a couple of times tonight. Areas of significant change, item 6 on page 155. Just draw out some of those. Obviously, we've already mentioned about the financial strategy will need to be updated because of the pandemic. And in terms of the services, that just given a note of how we've responded to the pandemic, and how we'll need to assess the impact on council services and council systems, as well as the finance, to ensure that there's good governance as we go forward. So there's early indications about the leisure management services contract, and there's reports being produced for members as we speak, and that. But in terms of the particular problems that we've found in the leisure industry, and that it's a national issue, but members will be asked to consider on how we may address that locally going forward. So in this report, at the time of writing, there were early indications that there was financial stress, but there are ways in taking that forward. And not least, as we've found tonight, in terms of how we conduct meetings, and that doing them over virtual, and that then there's reference to the changes there, which that will be in place. Well, the legislation gives us the ability to have those in place until May 2021. So there's commentary there in terms of how we do business. And then finally, other significant risks, not so much related to COVID. Obviously, we've got Braintree will be part of Britain leaving the European Union. We're not going to be left behind. That obviously gives some areas of concern in terms of the uncertainties that are placed around that we will be leaving at the end of December this year. And then just a final comment about the risks around the uncertainty of the finances and the way that local government has been financed. There were due to be changes for this current year. They've now been postponed until the next financial year, and there's some question as to whether those will actually be able to be made in that timescale. So there's uncertainties there about the future arrangements of how local government will be funded going forward. But overall, the conclusion on page 157, recognising that the council has been impacted by the pandemic, but governance arrangements have been tested and have been found to be robust in 1920, whilst recognising that the pandemic will bring substantial risk to the council in 2021. There will be an ongoing review of the financial impact, as well as the impact on procedures and processes relating to the emergency. So that is the statement that is been drafted and is proposed to be put before or for signature by Councillor Butland and Andy Wright, Chief Executive. So happy to take any questions and observations that members may have on that proposed annual governance statement.
Thank you very much, Trevor. That's an important document, and I'm pleased to see there are no significant governance issues arisen during the year. So let's hope that continues. I think we have a question, or Councillor Walsh would like to speak. Please, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Trevor Wilson, for a very comprehensive summary and report. I hadn't planned to ask a question, but just looking at page 152, which refers to the members' code of conduct. I mean, this is purely an informational question. It says there that there have been a small number of complaints and no particular action is required. I'm just wondering, and I accept you probably wouldn't be in a position to answer this now, but at some stage, I wonder if we could get some indication of the number and trends in these questions, maybe a summary of the issues. And lastly, I ask this because I'm a member of the Standards Committee, but in the year or so I've been on the council, it hasn't met. Somebody could tell me what determines when the Standards Committee actually meets. Please don't read a lot into these questions. It's really just information.
Chairman, I can take that question, although I'm here in my capacity as meeting facilitator. I'm Deputy Monitoring Officer, and I've actually submitted the information to the Corporate Governance Statement. So I can advise that the number of reports that are documented in the Corporate Governance Statement are complaints which have been dealt with through the local filtering process, which is a process we've had in place for a number of years. Because of the nature of the correspondence with the monitoring officer is confidential, because they are simply allegations when the complaints are received. We do not put into the public domain any great detail around those complaints. One, because it's an allegation, and two, there is quite often a misuse of the complaints process for the code of conduct. Quite often wider issues are raised, particularly around conduct of meetings, not just at district council, but also at parish councils. So quite often the monitoring officer will receive a number of complaints, which we put through the local filtering process, and we assess those, and quite often they are not matters which the monitoring officer has jurisdiction over. But we do have to go through a formal process which we filter those and respond back to the complainants. There are some complaints where matters have been raised after the monitoring officer has already taken some informal action. So again, we would not put those through the formal standards process because it would be duplication. If it's been dealt with, then the code allows the monitoring officer to not repeat an activity where there'd be the same or no different outcome. In terms of the Standards Subcommittee, the Standards Subcommittee does not meet unless the monitoring officer has taken a complaint through the local filtering process and has determined that a matter requires investigation because there has been evidence of a breach of the code of conduct. Now, the Standards Subcommittee, under the formal arrangement, so that is under the old statutory code, did meet as a committee on a regular basis and took a number of information items. When the statutory process changed and we were no longer required to have a statutory standards committee, a lot of the code of conduct work was transferred to this committee under its previous names. So we do not call a standards subcommittee unless there is an allegation which has gone through the local filtering process and the monitoring officer has determined the matter must go for investigation. Depending on the outcome of that investigation would determine whether or not we have to have a formal standards committee. So really it sits as a, want for a better description, a point of determination. So if there's nothing to be determined, then we will not call a standards subcommittee. So whilst Councillor Walsh, you are a member of the standards subcommittee, it is an ad hoc committee called for as and when the monitoring officer requires it. So you will not be having a standard set of business items. Matters which are for the code of conduct and the conduct process is a matter for this committee. And as you and other colleagues are aware, we are calling a additional meeting of this committee on the 11th of August to look at the LGA's consultation on the model code of conduct. So we are waiting for that work, and it's possible that some of your queries around the arrangements on standards will be dealt with through that process. But at the moment, our local arrangements is that we don't call standards committee unless it's required by the monitoring officer. Does that answer your inquiry?
That's fine for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that very clear explanation, and I guess that prompts us to think that on the 11th we're having a special meeting to discuss that, and I hope that members have managed if they can to attend one of the video webinars for the LGA as in preparation. If there, and Councillor Santamaro would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Trevor, just a reminder really for us and those watching, I suppose. The leisure facilities, obviously there's a bit of uproar with regards to the opening and the current situation. What can you remind us how this works? Obviously Fusion run it for the council, but in terms of the financial footing, do they pay us? How do we support them? What's the arrangement when the public are querying obviously the opening?
Okay, so yes, we engage Fusion to provide their leisure facilities on behalf of the council. Essentially, they make a payment to us, a management fee, and we have some say in the setting of the fees and charges. But essentially, we moved from a position under previous arrangements where we paid a substantial sum for the leisure facility to one where, I say, we receive a management fee from Fusion for the provision of that, and that's very much driven by the way in which the Fusion as an organisation is structured, and is able to take advantages of various tax arrangements and that. So that's the way that's dealt with. So we do actually, as I say, get a small amount of income coming in from that service area.
Thank you very much for that, Trevor. I don't see any other questions, so and it's asked, therefore, that we agree, excuse me, first of all, the updated local code of corporate governance as detailed in Appendix A, and number 2, the annual governance statement for 2019-20 as detailed in Appendix B, which we're reminded will be signed by the leader of the council and the chief executive. I'll take silence as agreement. Do I take it that the report or the two parts of it have been agreed? Thank you, members. The report is agreed, and we will now proceed to agenda item 13, Treasury Management Annual Report 2019-2020. Members, the report is set out on pages 158 to 179 of the agenda. Please can I invite Phil Myers, Financial Services Manager, to set out the report.
Yes, yes. Good evening, Chair and members. So this report is the annual report. So this is looking at the activity on our Treasury management function during the 2019-20 financial year. Prior to the start of the year, there was a strategy approved as part of the council's budget in 2019, and at this group's meeting in October of 2019, a mid-year report was considered, which updated the assumptions and forecasts for this area of the council's finances. Like with all these treasury management reports, they come with some external context. So there's a brief economic and market commentary that's included in the report, and in more detail at Appendix A. I think it'd be fair to say that the world is probably a much different place now than is set out in that review. Although obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic emerging in the early part of this calendar year, there were some impacts in the 1920 in terms of treasury management. Accepting this quite a detailed report, and obviously we've had quite a lengthy agenda. I wasn't proposing to go through the report in a great deal of detail, so I was just going to pick out some of the points from each of the sections. So section 4 of the report looks at the council's capital expenditure and financing for the year. And this shows that actual expenditure for the year was just short of £7 million at £6.99 million. And this was financed primarily from a mixture of the council's own resources, from such as capital receipts, grants and contributions from third parties, and also an amount of internal borrowing of just over £1.33 million. The actual expenditure was quite significantly reduced, certainly from what was originally forecast in the February, but also lower than that was forecast at the mid-year point. The main reasons for that stem around the council's district investment programme, and particularly the projects of the Manor Street regeneration and Horizon 120, where spending on those projects was much lower. A start on those projects was delayed for various reasons. As we've heard already this evening, though, those projects are now expected to incur substantial expenditure in the current year. So next year, this year's annual report will probably look very different in terms of the actual capital expenditure we've incurred. As a result of the reduced expenditure, that's reflected in a balance sheet measure called the capital financing requirement, which is a measure of how much the council may justifiably borrow for capital purposes. So the capital financing requirement, or the CFR, was also lower at the end of the year than we envisaged at the start. Section 5 covers borrowing and other debt of the council. You'll see from there was a slight reduction in other long-term liabilities. These are finance leases, predominantly for some of the council's fleet. So we pay annual payments on those leases, and therefore they reduce gradually over time. The external borrowing remained at £6 million, and this is comprises of 2 lender option and borrower option loans, and those are loans that the council has had on its books for some years now. They were taken out in 2002, so some old legacy debt that we have there. This section also includes details of the total internal borrowing. As I said, we increased the level of internal borrowing to fund the capital programme for the 1920 year. Total internal borrowing, and this is where the council is using its own cash balances to defray any external borrowing, stood at £4.6 million. And that again is predominantly for the Horizon 120 project, where we anticipate in the near term selling service land plots, which will generate capital receipts, and that will then be applied to meet the financing of the past expenditure. Looking ahead, we've always anticipated that our borrowing requirements would increase because of the district investment programme. We keep under review whether that need ought to be met by advance borrowing if circumstances dictated. So that's a position we keep under review, and there was no reason to actually borrow in advance of need, principally because the cost of carrying that borrowing would outweigh the benefits of that at the moment. Section 6 of the report deals with investment activity. So the average amount invested across the year was 63.64 million, and that was ranged between just over 50 million and up to a level of just over 73 million pound, which is higher than we have had in previous years. Table 5, there's a table 5 on page 169 of the report, which that provides the details of the movement by investment type. So it shows the new investments that we made under different categories of investments and what was sold, and shows what the balance was at the end of the year, and also the running yield or return on that portfolio as at the 31st of March. Table 6 on page 170, that shows the actual source of the cash that is available for investment. So at the end of March, 52.309 million. Most of that is derived from the council's balances and reserves. And it also shows how the extent of the internal borrowing that the council's incurred actually reduces that amount that we have available for investment. There are two areas of activity just highlight in terms of the investments. So during the year, we increased the amount that was invested in the council's pooled funds by £1 million. That was into the Kames Diversified Fund, taking the total amount held in our long-term pooled fund investments to £19 million. And also there was an increase in the amounts that we were lending to other local authorities, and this particularly in the latter half of the year, as the Public Works Loan Board, that is the traditional source of borrowing for local authorities, they increased their margins on the rates for borrowing to local authorities, making it quite a relatively expensive source of borrowing, and that seemed to have translated into much more activity in the local to local market. The issue of the financial markets and the emerging impact of the COVID pandemic towards the end of the financial year, that had inevitable consequences on the financial markets, and their expectations that global economic growth would be lower. We saw that in the council's pooled fund valuations, which fell in value significantly at the end of March. So against a value of £19 million that was invested, the actual market value of those funds was 16.744 million at that time. That represented an unrealised loss of £2.256 million. Although, as has already been heard earlier this evening, there's been some significant recovery on those values, so that at current time those funds are just about £940,000 lower than what was invested. There is also a note in the report about the Ccla Fund, which is the property fund that the council has £3 million invested. This fund actually ceased trading for the fund, so you couldn't buy or sell into that fund, sell out of that fund, and this was really in line with the Financial Conduct Authority rules, where there is material uncertainty around the pricing of the assets of the fund. And again, this was the consequence of the COVID-19 and the uncertainty that was creating around property market pricing. We continue to keep that position under review. The council wasn't anyway looking to take its money out, and we continue to get quarterly dividends from that fund in the meantime. The report also shows the results of some benchmarking that we have access to through our client arrangements with Ireland Close. This shows that in comparative terms that we had strong credit quality on our internally managed investments, and we had an above average income return for our whole portfolio. But not unsurprisingly, the total return, which takes into account changes in market value, that was not as good as comparatively, and there was a higher degree of external fund volatility within our portfolio. And this just reflects the fact that as an authority, we have taken quite a position in terms of long-term pooled funds. So we always knew there would be short-term volatility around those funds, but in the long run they would yield higher income returns for us. Section 7 of the report then sets out just the financial implications of the Treasury activities. So interest paid was just around £394,000. Conversely, investment income was actually £1.281 million, which was an overachievement against budget of nearly £250,000. The pool, you'll see in the report that the pooled funds were a major contributor to that income, as opposed to our short-term investments. It was agreed that the £250,000 should be parked and set aside into the Treasury Management Reserve as a contingency against future income levels, because because of the downturn in economic climate, we do anticipate potentially a reduction in in our investment income, as was alluded to earlier this evening. Section 8 deals with the non-treasury investments, so the council's direct property portfolio. Here there was net rental income of just over £2.2 million, or a 6% return on the average value of the assets held. And we also had some service loans, which at the end of the year we had £55,000 outstanding, having received £250,000 during the year of repayments. Section 9 and 10 deals with a range of compliance and treasury management indicators, and those sections just show that we were compliant across those during the year. And section 11 then just picks up on and confirms that we continue to retain the services of Ireland Close as advisors on treasury management issues. They provide us with technical advice, but they also attend regularly the strategic investment programme group chaired by Councillor McKee. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Phil. The usual excellent explanation of our financial situation, or part of it. I don't see, excuse me, any questions. Do we have any questions, members? No. I think it's useful to just to note that I guess one of the changes, as I've discussed with you on occasion, is the loans to other local authorities, which I suppose shows us to be in a good position, that we're in the position of being able to loan rather than needing to borrow. And it was pleasing to hear that the pooled funds are starting to come back. Thank you again, Phil. So, members, it's asked that we recommend to Cabinet acceptance of the report prior to submission to full council. I'll take silence as agreement. Do I take it that we recommend to Cabinet acceptance of the report prior to its submission to full council? I'll take, yes, I've taken silence as agreement. Thank you, members. The report is recommended to Cabinet And we will now proceed to agenda item 14, urgent business. Members, I confirm that there is no urgent business for consideration at this meeting. So we have concluded our business for the evening, as there is no urgent business, and I will close this meeting of the Corporate Governance Group at 9:12. Thank you, members, and to Mr. Bladen of BDO and officers for your attendance this evening, and those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. I'll now hand over to the meeting facilitator.
Thank you, members. Before I ask the webcaster to terminate the broadcast, I would urge members to complete the short web-based survey, meeting feedback survey that has